So I'm John Howell. I look after smart spaces and IoT. So the first thing you'll notice is that job doesn't exist in HP. I've been doing it for 11 years, but it's an unofficial title. So it really means that I get involved with anything around location-based services, analytics, AR-based navigation, IoT, anything that we plug into the access point. That's where I come in. So if you have a hospital that wants to do asset tracking, I look after all those integrations. So for example, if you came and said we want to try this new tag, or we wanted to try a new method of using Apple Maps with GPS, that's where my team come in. So we work with the partner, like Apple Maps, for example. We send them the GPS data from the access point, and then we build that into a solution. So I'm normally getting involved when access points are already up, on the ceiling, connected, working in Central or AOS 8, and then I come in and say, right, now we can actually build an outcome about this as well. I can't start presenting, which I was just about to do, because she hasn't said yes. But what I'm going to cover is really, the first thing, I'll just go through a bit of market trends that we're seeing, especially around IoT. The second piece is really about reducing energy and carbon footprint, really leveraging all the data we can get from the network and pushing that into sustainability insights with HPE, or pushing it into another dashboard. I'm going to show you one that we've built for Northern Europe, which is available to buy. But we have other partners that are building their own platforms, or you've got the big platforms like Schneider, EcoStruxure, and Delta, Trend, Honeywell, who have their own platforms to reduce energy. So I'll cover that bit, and then I'm going to go through some use cases. And I've brought a couple of different types of sensor with me just to explain how that's used when reducing energy or measuring energy. And then I'll risk a couple of live demos at the end. But in between each section, just ask me if there's any questions. So the first thing I wanted to say is that I've been doing this for about 12 years. I was at Cisco before. Then I was actually at HP, which is quite a funny story. I was at HP, and then I left and went to Meraki. And then Meraki got acquired by Cisco. I didn't want to work for Cisco, so I left and went to Aruba. And 6 months after I joined Aruba, HP acquired Aruba, and I ended up back where I started. But for most of that time, I've been talking about IoT-ready wireless. And this is incredibly important. And you can see with the new Forrester Wave where we are in that quadrant. It's top right. The reason for this is if you look at Wi-Fi, this is why they don't record my sessions. If you look at Wi-Fi, it's a high-speed unit that sits on a ceiling and connects to a PoE switch. The maximum you can do around sustainability with a Wi-Fi access point is what I'm going to show you with AI engines and reducing power to the network. But unless it's basically an IoT-ready network, you can't do anything else. So you don't want to stop at the network when it comes to reducing energy and sustainability. So what we've done is we've made our strategy in the product IoT-focused. And you'll see that when I show you the IoT 7 access point. And I'll explain a little bit why we put in each radio. The next thing is demand for location services has exploded. I don't know about you, but I reckon over the last 5 years, 5 years ago, people were saying, I don't know why you do indoor location and beacons, and no one wants to stick beacons on walls. A few people did. Some people tried using beacons on walls. And then we started looking at GPS, and then we're doing things like hyperlocal marketing. And all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, it's exploded because the access points have finally caught up with the customer's expectations. If I remember what I did for a big Swedish furniture company, I remember going in there and saying, we can do blue dot navigation with beacons. And then they said, well, actually, it's taken you 3 weeks to install one store, and we've got 400. So you'll be dead by the time you've finished installing the beacons. So it was, the expectations were there, but the technology wasn't there to have these services. So asset management, wayfinding, foot traffic trends, hyperlocal marketing, especially in retail, all of that has exploded. And by doing so, it means that IoT has suddenly exploded. because all of these things have sensors, they have some sort of device that's helping us figure out what's going on in the building. So if you take a look at those market trends, especially in offices, in fact, if you look at every single vertical, it's doubling IoT. And that leads to two major problems. It leads to a security risk, which I'll cover, and I think some of you have been around and seen the central CNX demos with the new IoT policy engine, which I'll cover a little bit of that. But a lot of the reason for offices, retail, and public venues in Europe is down to regulation. That's one of the things I'll talk about. So product-wise, I've had to remove one box because we haven't announced it yet. And I actually put it in there about 10 minutes ago. If you look at this access point, you can see it's being developed a lot more for these use cases. Around sustainability, it's especially power save mode, which I'll cover. But then you start to look at things like the GPS receiver and the dual Bluetooth radios, the Zigbee, the fact it should be able to support Thread and Matter in the future. The missing box there is something called 802.11az, which is all about hyper-accurate Wi-Fi location. USB ports, there's now 2 of them. And the reason for that is if you want to run a sustainable IoT network in LoRaWAN or sub-gigahertz, then you have to use that via the USB radio because it's a different antenna. So if you notice what they've done, barometric pressure sensors as well, so you know what floor you're on in a building. All of that works brilliantly when you're coming to building an intelligent building. And these buildings, we basically call them hyper-aware. We're making a building hyper-aware. So the building itself knows where the people are, the assets are, the sensors are, and what's happening in that building. This is an HPE slide, you can tell. This is basically saying we take the ESP, the Aruba piece in the middle where it says solution offering, and that's private 5G. That can be right across through to analytics, ClearPass, the Wi-Fi, the switching. And then what we do is our team, we build the IoT use cases around it. And the reason we're going to talk about sustainable networking is that's where I'm busiest at the moment. So probably what I'll do is cover mostly around healthcare, education, and FSI, so large corporate buildings. They're the ones being impacted most, but really this comes down to retail as well, with large retailers having loads of branches that are using massive amounts of energy, which needs to be reduced. So sustainable spaces, we've basically called it that because I came up with the name Sustainable Spaces, Sustainable IoT. It's really, it's a way to go to customers like yourselves and say, you have 220 buildings. How much time is the lights on? How often do you clean the toilets? Why is there power to certain areas? Why is there car charging in a building that hasn't been used? Occupancy. So we're working with a big bank, and they've said that there's 220 buildings. They've got 40% occupancy post-COVID. People just don't work there anymore. So they've got 220 buildings that are being cleaned by ISS, which is costing a fortune. The lifts are being serviced, the lights are on, the power's on, the heating's on. So they want to monitor that occupancy and optimize the space, get the report back, and then say, okay, now we're going to make these buildings efficient and we're going to sell these or repurpose these. That's the main reason. The other reason is that, and that's the reason we're really, really busy. This is these new EU regulations. Because I come from England, we've dodged it for another 3 years, because of Brexit. But if you look at most European countries, and now in the US, especially New York State, they're implementing a load of new regulations, which means you've got to have a sustainable building. So you look at BREEAM and WELL and all the other platinum smart building options, all of those conformities have to conform to regulation. So if you look carefully at some of these, it will say new residential and non-residential buildings must have 0 on-site emissions. So the only way to monitor HVAC output, CO2, energy management, and energy consumption is to have devices in the building. You can't think about it and guess through thin air. And that's what's driving IoT adoption. The specialty one that's interesting here is BACS. So BACS is a building automation control systems law that's coming in force in France. in 2 months. And I've been speaking to some of my French customers that said, hang on, that means we've got to report on our carbon and our energy consumption and prove we're reducing that in 2 months' time, and we haven't got a building that knows what it's doing. There's no sensors in the building, they're not reporting, they're not managing it, hence the rush. So that's one thing you should definitely take a look at when looking at these sustainable networking. So there are 3 ways we're doing it. One is through Sustainability Dashboard. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen, but there's a booth by the Green Lake, yeah, so some of you are nodding. They're now using this Insights dashboard to pull in other vendor energy knowledge as well. So Cisco and Dell, other devices. So one way we're doing it at HP, before I get into the sensors and things, is building this sustainability dashboard. And that's really useful for things like ESG reporting, environmental social governance. So all of your facility managers are going to be screaming for carbon reduction and energy data. And I'm betting you that 12% to 15% of your building's consumption is coming from IT. So that's the first thing that real estate are going to start to come to you if you're all IT managers or network directors, etc. They're going to start coming and saying, we need to improve our energy consumption for the BACS regulation or European Energy Directive, and we need to reduce this by 6 or 7%, and your network's doing 15% of our power, so what are you going to do? So you as IT managers are going to have to go back to real estate and C-level and say, we're going to have to implement this. That's why we built this sustainability dashboard. And it looks something like that. So it's pulling in the power from compute, storage, servers, now Aruba as well, third-party vendors. I've actually just had a meeting with them and asked them if they can pull in some of the sensor data that I'll be talking about, and then you've got everything in one place. This is really just an IT solution, because when it comes to a hyper-aware building, it's not IT managing this stuff, it's actually facilities, because you've got car charging, lifts, HVAC, things like that IT isn't involved in. But it's a really good start to reducing the power consumption and understanding it. The second way is what we're doing, is we're reducing our own emissions, but we're also recycling a lot of goods. So last year we recycled 27 million pounds in weight of access points. So if you go to Scotland, there's a really big recycling centre. I think there's 3 globally. And the access points, servers, storage, everything that's not being wanted anymore gets put in, and they recycle it, strip it all out, and repurpose it. So that's one thing. But the second thing is understanding where it's made, how much cobalt we're using, what the silicon's coming from. So the first piece is that sustainability dashboard. But then, so you're understanding where the power's going, but you need to now reduce the power in your network, firstly. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen this, but this is dynamic power saving that's coming in our new version of Central. And this is, I was actually scared to death of this to start with, because I was a bit worried about an AI turning my Wi-Fi off in a building that may be running an event, because the AI thinks it's Saturday and shouldn't be on. So, we've got around that. But this is really doing a look at the scope of the building, seeing what's being used, seeing what the access points are doing. If there's no users on the access points, turn them off. That's really all it's doing. But we can get savings of around €300 a month, a year, for 100 access points. So if you have 100 access points in a building and you use dynamic power saving, you'll get €200 to €300 a year of saving, which isn't a lot. But if you have 9,000 access points, like some of our university customers do, it starts to make an impact. One thing we've done for this, to stop me being petrified, is we've now said that the IoT radio won't be switched off in that, because we have partners in this room that are building intelligent buildings, and what we don't want is the AI turning the intelligent building off to save power, because it uses very, very minimal. But you can see here that it will go from 21 watts of power on full. When it realizes no one's there, it will drop it to 0. After that, if no one's using it at all, it will go to deep sleep mode, and then it's 2 watts after that. So it's quite a big saving. So then the last thing, so you've got your sustainability dashboard, you've got your Aruba recycling, etc. The next thing we do, I meant to use a clicker, but I want to do a demo at the end, is we use the HPE connectivity. So we use the Aruba access point as an IoT gateway. That means you can take anything that you've got, like a Zebra scanner, a sensor. This one, for example, is an energy harvesting CT clamp. So probably not many of you. Have any of you seen one of these before? Yeah, I know you have. So this is a really good way to measure how much energy your building's using on each floor. So you can use a smart meter for a building, but a smart meter will actually only look at your power consumption every 30 minutes or 1 hour and report back. So you'll see power like this over it. These things are every 30 seconds, so you can see power like this, which I'll show you. And we've actually trialed that with Toyota. Oh yeah, we're videoing this. We're trialing this with a large Japanese car manufacturer. And it's first error of the session. And what they did is actually put this in and realize that there's a huge spike in 2 conveyor systems. So the conveyor systems had this pull, energy pull of a certain amount of watts. And then all of a sudden, they got this huge spike, reported on it, and shut it down. Afterwards, the guy that runs that line said if that hadn't shut down, they would have lost 300,000 euros in value of build. So this can be used for preventative maintenance, it can be used for tracking energy. But really the example here is you can take any of these things, connect it through HPE technology, so the Aruba access point, and then push it into the cloud. And I'll show you how we do that. So you're taking things like asset tracking, digital signage, sensors, you're connecting it through the Bluetooth radio, the Zigbee radio. In this case, we've got an Enocean radio, but it can be any method. And you take that data and then you transport that data into a cloud. And that could be something like Schneider's EcoStruxure, for example. So as you probably know, Schneider's one of the biggest global energy hardware companies, like Honeywell. So what we're doing at the moment is trialing to see if we can take the data from a sensor, send it through MQTT into Schneider's EcoStruxure. And then Schneider is managing that whole building. So then you get really good visibility. But what it does mean from a sustainability piece is that you can massively reduce the amount of infrastructure you're using. Now, this doesn't come down well when I'm selling Aruba switches, because what I'm basically saying is you don't need as many, which doesn't go down well. So we had a school recently that wanted 750 sensors, wired sensors through PoE, and they were just going to buy them. And then I joined the meeting and ruined it by saying, you don't need to buy any of these 37 switches. You don't need this 6,000 kilometers of PoE cable to be deployed, because we'll do the whole thing on energy harvesting wireless. Now, joking apart, that has a huge impact on cost savings. But also, if you look at recent requests for information we're having from our customers, one came across my desk last month from a big healthcare trust, and they said, we do not want rare resources being used in this IoT implementation. What that means is we don't want additional copper being used. So for example, if they're going to build a new hospital, which they're building, they want the light switches to not have copper running through them. They don't want a whole building with 7,000 kilometers of cable in it because it's a rare resource. The other thing they didn't want is any batteries in any of those sensors because it's Europe's greenest hospital. And if you put a battery in something, it's full of cobalt, lithium, it needs replacing. So in this example, you can press a light switch like that. It's using its own power. It lasts forever. It's kinetic. It goes back over the Wi-Fi and turns the light on. So that gives us a huge advantage when it comes to cost savings. So you imagine now, we haven't put any cabling in to implement this. We haven't put any power cabling in to implement this because everything's self-powered. And the access points were powered anyway, so there's no additional PoE needed. So it's around 89% cost savings, which is quite a big number. So what we've done, this is one example, by the way. We've got 350 integrations, but I couldn't have time to go through each one. So this is an example of energy harvesting we've done with Microsoft Azure and Enocean. It was developed basically with Microsoft and Enocean, where we've got the existing infrastructure that's very secure. So you in IT are going to say, if we're deploying IoT, we're not going to deploy it over a third-party gateway that we bought on eBay, for example, or a third-party gateway that may be produced in one of the countries you don't want to work with. You'll prefer to absorb that data through the Aruba network where it's secured and then pass it on to Azure IoT or something like that, or your building management system. So we're the security, the connectivity, and the infrastructure that's already there. EnOcean is an interesting company that came out of Siemens around 17 years ago that generates energy harvesting technology. And they are the leaders when it comes to sustainable spaces or sustainable IoT. And then Microsoft, of course, we all know Microsoft. So we've got the Azure platform, we've also got Google Cloud APIs, and we've got other things that I'll talk about. But it means that we can have some really interesting use cases. So people counting occupancy, this little sensor here, you can have a ceiling-mounted one, but this one here is the one on the left. And I'm going to do a live demo of showing you that working in my London lab. But that lasts 7 days on this much LED light, so an in-office LED light. And it will go off if it doesn't see light for about 5 days, something like that. You get activity sensors, people counting. There's 7,500 different types of these sensors. But what it means is you can deploy an occupancy sensor for a meeting room, which I'll show you one running in Sweden. Is anyone from Advania in here today? Great, I can show their office. I thought I'd just check before I show their office. But in that case, we're actually putting these little sensors in the meeting room. If someone's at a desk and typing, it vibrates and we can see it's occupied. And then we're using that data to reduce how many floors we have on certain days of the week. So reducing power, basically, and cleaning costs. We can use it for smarter cleaning. In our London office, we realized that I think we've got cleaners every day of the week, and I was the only one there on a Friday when I went in by accident. So you've got ISS, cleaning, there's catering, there's power on, all of that. So cleaning is another one. So you can save 20 to 25% on cleaning costs. That's a really clear ROI to build as well. I mean, it's sort of ROI you can see straight away. General asset management, so that's using sensors like you'll see on my booth, which is 502. I've got a lot of different assets there. So that's just really about water leakage. We've got some kinetic-powered water leakage sensors. And this came around because we were with a big hotel group 6 months ago, and they said, thanks, John, for talking about energy consumption, but one thing you missed out in sustainability was water. And water, yeah. So water, in fact, is one of my focus areas I'm doing now. I've got a few water sensors on my booth because he said we run a big group of Greek hotels. Each guest of that hotel basically uses 78% more water than a local inhabitant. Because when you go to a hotel, you just stand under the shower, you don't really care, it's not your water bill. The other thing is, if you have 4 toilets or 5 toilets leaking in a hotel, it can cost around €1,200 a month in wasted water. So you've got a cost impact, a damage impact, if it's flooding in a room, but also a sustainability one. So what's going to start coming on in Europe, and we saw this in a big hotel meeting we had, a big group, we've got 400 hotels, they said, I'm going to show you our water presentation. So they've got a sustainability presentation about 40 pages long. 10 of it is about water for these hotels. So that's another thing we all need to keep in mind. When you see on the title of this, it's energy and CO2. Water is another big one. And then you've got well-being. So ESG, vape detection for hotels, but vape detection for schools, because that was being done. Vape detection's always been a very hard one to do, because if you try and detect something in a bathroom, you can't use a camera. If you can't use a camera, it makes it very hard to tell if someone's vaping. So the only other way to tell if someone's vaping is to study the particulates that are coming out of the vape, and then know the difference between that and an aerosol can, for example. So we've got 3 or 4 different types of partners that do that. The other one is around Legionella prevention. So I bet you didn't, well, you probably did know, I didn't know, that if you have a hotel room or a private healthcare clinic room where patients stay, and you don't run a tap for a month, there's Legionella disease in it, which I didn't realize. So Legionella prevention is another one that we're working on now. So you know how often those taps are flushed through, and then you can run a Legionella report, which hotels have to do now, which I didn't realise. Vape detection I've covered, because that's pretty much the same. And then we get to energy saving. And this is really interesting. So energy saving can be done with the AI engines that I told you from Aruba, sustainability dashboard with new switches that are reducing 30% of power and compute. But the fastest way to do energy consumption savings is turn the heating off. It's the fastest way. The other thing is, if you have a smart building, a lot of buildings are old buildings. They're not brand new buildings. They're 1960s, 70s, 90s. So there are ways to do it with things like this, which is a TRV. It's called a heating valve controller. Can you see that on the top left, next to the orange sign? And that's coming really useful for some of our customers we're doing now that have older buildings, like a school or an old university with older buildings. They can implement these TRVs, and these are energy harvesting. So they don't use any power again, and they turn themselves off by using the difference in temperature between the ambient temperature and the pipe temperature. That generates enough power. So you can go into an older building, put them on all the radiators, tell your building management control that if there's no presence detected in that sensor, basically no one's in it, or there's no door, or the window's left open, etc., you can then go in and say, turn the heating up, turn the heating down. If the window's open, turn the HVAC off and on. That's where you get the biggest savings. Because a lot of the time, these buildings are being heated. One university I visited was 26 degrees in the rooms, and the radiators were on full, and it was at May time. So it's burning amounts of energy. This one is at individual room temperature control. So this is one we've done for universities. And universities are coming to us saying they have halls of residence full of students that don't care. That's the difference. The Xbox is on, they leave the lights on, the power's on, the heating's on, because the student's paying their 500 euros a month or 800 euros a month. So what we've done here is we've worked with EnOcean to build a single suite use case where you can actually have a TRV, an Aruba access point with a presence detection, with a multi-sensor, which is there, stuck on the walls before the students start. What we're actually looking at now is the water sensors as well, because they told me a student has an average shower time of 7 minutes. 7 to 9 minutes, students stand there wasting water. So they're actually going to use this as well to flash up a sign if they shower for more than 3 minutes. Little things like that make massive differences on cost savings. And then if you actually look at the reasons why we've done it with EnOcean, I've started to work wider into Bluetooth 6 and the new versions of Bluetooth because they're getting in lower and lower power. But the main reason for this was having no batteries, having the sustainability approach, so having it a sustainable IoT. In fact, they last forever. There's still an impact on the environment for producing that, but you're not replacing it every 3 years. That's the big difference. So less installations, less support, no batteries to change, and it's working through Aruba. So what do we do at Aruba to do this? Some of this you may have seen, so I'm hoping some of it you haven't seen. So we have a big differentiator here when it comes to these smart buildings. There's a couple of competitors that are out there that we work with in the market, and they haven't deployed any IoT engines. And what's happened now is they've been caught out quite badly. I was at one event, actually, that I had to present next to 2 other vendors around IoT, and they couldn't present anything on IoT because there wasn't an IoT story. So what we've done is we've built something called an IoT operations and engines, and that's basically like an app store for IoT. And the reason our team are quite busy is what we're trying to do is go out to the market, talk to customers like you, and say, what do you need in your building? And you may say to me, I need a Danfoss sensor for a radiator. Or we need Honeywell integration or Schneider integration. And then what I'm doing is going out, meeting them and integrating it into the network. So you as customers can just click on the network and connect it to the building. That's the point of it. And it looks something like this. I won't go too technical. It's meant to be a business one, this one. But what we do is we take the data from the IoT devices, we push it through the access point, through Bluetooth or the dongle, into Central. It does also work in AOS 8, but you have to have a separate virtual machine and different things. And then we take the metadata into the IoT connector, which is a VM that sits on the access point. So in a 600 series and a 700 series, your IoT connector is a VM that can work on the AP because it's powerful enough. If it's 500 series and below, you have to make your own virtual machine, basically. And then we take that data from the things through Central, through that connector, and we pass the data out to the partner backend, Azure IoT, Schneider, building management system, etc. But that's the model you need to remember after this session. If you remember one thing, remember that one, how it works. And then you look like that. So you end up with an app store in Aruba Central. So as you can see, we've added IoT transport for Azure down there, so you can take all that IoT data and transport it straight into your Azure IoT hub, because a lot of the partners work with that. We've got Sonitor integration now. We've got 2 versions of Enocean. We've activated Minu devices, because Minu have a lot of, they probably own the market in Bluetooth smart building devices, like ultrasonic sensors and things like that. And then, of course, you've got the IoT operations, but now you need to secure it. And this is the big change coming in Central CNX. So if you've been to the booth upstairs, to Guido and the others, you'll see we've got this Central version, new version coming out this year. It's sort of out, actually, but I think it's mainly being released next year. And what we've done is we've made IoT a real priority for security. So you can't implement these smart buildings, and it's hit me twice in the past with customers, where I've agreed with IT to put in a load of sensors, connect a dongle to their access point, send the data to Azure, and then this guy for a big Swiss bank ran down the stairs and pretty much ripped it all out. Because he said, I don't know where the data's going, I don't know what that thing's doing, where is it talking to, how is it talking to the cloud? And that's when we realized we needed to really upgrade the IoT security platform. So this IoT security automation in Central is basically profiling the devices, working out how they behave, and then enforcing it. So I tested this at home. I bought some TP-Link. I've got some TP-Link light switches. I've put some of these sensors in. After 5 days, it said, I've seen these devices. I know it's IoT. The behavioral traffic is this, and I'm going to enforce it onto this port. And I didn't touch it, pretty much. So it looks something like that. So if you take a Zebra scanner, it will recognize the signal quality, it will recognize the application throughput and where these applications are going, how much time it's been on the network, and even things like iPhones, pretty much anything that's connected to it. But if you start looking at devices, this policy optimizer can start to look at camera traffic. So if you look at our demo upstairs, we've got an Axis camera that's doing 11 gig of data to Russia that was found. So it starts to make you realize that these devices, if you don't know where the traffic's going from IoT, it could be going anywhere. And that's the most important piece. So what it will do is it will come up with rule options. So my sensors here, even that light switch, it came back to me and said, it is talking on this port to this IoT IP address, but these 3 IP addresses, it shouldn't be, because its main connector and its cloud owner in Ocean Cloud is on this IP address. So it just said, I would advise you to block these 3, and I blocked them. But that was all through that AI engine, which is pretty impressive, I think. So you can see there, you've got your allowed, which IP address it's going to, and it gives you a pie chart of that behavior mapping, so you can see where that traffic's going. And what we do after that is we say, okay, we've secured it, we've got the network, we've got all the sensors, and then we go out into the market and we work with a lot of these partners. So if you look at ABB, for example, we've put that into CERN, you know, the big particle accelerator, where they're using it to measure vibration for their sensors down there. We've got Critical Arc, we've got Oracle, Cerner, all of those different partners, and this is just a tiny, tiny amount of these partners that are doing that. So here's a couple of examples. Energy consumption. This one, our engineer built in about 40 minutes, just to give you an idea. So this stuff doesn't cost a lot to test it. It costs a lot more when you're going to build a platform or do a bit of integration. But if you want to simply just say, let's try this, let's connect it to some access points and see what the data is, we actually connected it to Power BI in the first place. So we took the feed of the API from all the data coming out of this nOcean cloud, and we just pushed it into Power BI and built a template. So we end up with something like that, which is CO2 monitoring. So we took a CO2 sensor, and it will just predict and send that data back. Before I get on to demoing it and showing it, what you find is to make that sustainable building, when it comes to sensors, you can see all the different use cases around here that I covered. And if you look, most of them are the same. It's just a slightly different use case. So in education, where I'm busiest at the moment, I would say, is saving energy, mainly saving energy. Hospitality is water and energy with hotels. Space occupancy as well is another piece, because you need to understand how the building's being used before you can optimize it. So all of these verticals you see above all need that. Production is a much harder one to make sustainable buildings, because you've got massive amounts of energy being used. So what we're using that for is, if you come upstairs, I've got a demo running a thin air platform, and that's measuring the energy consumption, movement, voltage, how much voltage is each conveyor belt using. That's what you can use to do things like that. And then you end up with pretty similar business outcomes. So if you look at space optimization in a main building, it's energy, CO2, and regulation, but it's also things like a desk in London costs €8,300. A desk in Frankfurt, London, Paris, can't remember the other city we did the survey on, it worked out to be about €8,300 to run a desk in an office in a European city. That's including the power, the IT, the cost. So if you can start to say, well, actually, we don't need that many desks, then you can save a lot of money. And if you look on our website, we've got a case reference with Credit Agricole Bank, and they've done exactly that. So they've implemented these sensors that I show you here over Aruba to reduce that usage. Here we go. So one thing I've done, this is just one example, is we had, I think, about 25 universities come to us in the UK and say, we've got to implement this, we need to understand this. It's called a healthy space, healthy study space. And they wanted to reduce the energy in the buildings. And I didn't have an end solution. Because what happened here was we built the technology with the sensors, and you know all about this. We built all that with the sensors, we connected it to the access points, we got the data coming out of the network. I had nowhere to send it to. So we had the customers wanting the IoT, but we didn't have an actual finalized solution. So I've got about 4 partners in EMEA, there's one sitting here, that have built their own dashboard, built their own route to market around this space about energy, CO2, etc. So this one I'm going to show you today is something called Vision. And they've built it for classrooms, education, and healthcare. And it's incredibly simple, which is the good thing about it. You can buy your Aruba infrastructure, you can then install it all, you can install the sensors, and then they'll provide a dashboard that pulls all that data in and customize it for what you want and do all the reporting on energy, water, CO2, and all the things I'll show you. So they've produced some decks here with some return on investment figures, and then they've built a nice looking dashboard. But if some of you pull out your telephones, you can scan that QR code, and that will take you to the Vision dashboard I'm going to show you in a second anyway. The left side is an office in London that we're running in our HPE building. The right side is just doing some CT clamp using this thing to measure energy and some flow on gas and water. What's good about this is they've built this QR engine into the platform, so a big university can look at the platform and see the whole building, but then each classroom can have this code out the front. And this adheres to this regulation around air quality for student productivity. Because I think I mentioned it the other day, we had a little session, and one of the reasons that universities want this done is because productivity plummets if CO2 goes up in a room. If you've ever been in a meeting for 3 hours with the door shut and you all feel like you want to get outside and you're falling asleep, you look at a CO2 sensor on a desk. So I took one to a meeting in Krakow, and we were all in this small meeting room with 25 customers, and people were yawning and feeling faint. And I pulled the sensor out, and it was bright red. And I said, this is exactly what I've been demoing. You're all exhausted because there's no airflow in the room. And that's the equivalent of having 2 glasses of red wine. The level in that room was the same as 2 medium glasses of red wine. So you put that in a school, and if you Google productivity students CO2, it has a massive impact on learning. So it's not just environment we're talking about here, it's productivity and other things as well. We've got all of this, before I open it, I'm going to show you a couple of things. We've got all of this running in our Geneva Centre. In January, we're going to start adding 3 new platforms into Geneva as well. So we're going to keep it going, get it bigger and bigger from a sustainability approach. We've got a sustainability insight centre there with a data centre showing all of the stuff I've just been presenting. So you're all welcome to come to our CIC in Geneva. Out of Europe, it's the best one because HP has, how do I say this on camera? HP has a way of building CICs where they have to look a certain way and they're more for customer entertaining, let's say. Geneva is a CIC, so it's a customer innovation centre. So we can do a lot more. So I've got all our sensors, we've got door locks, we've got all the things you'll want to see are there. So if you choose one, choose to come to see us there. And I will now just quickly show you a couple of things. Just going to get that down. Is there any questions, by the way? No? One question is, when can I have my lunch? That's probably your question. So I'll just show you this. Just a couple of things, if I can drag it. Oh, dear. Yes. So, my mouse should be here now. So there's a couple of things on here. So can you see that? It's quite dark, actually, isn't it? I was going to get to here. So this is the Vision dashboard. This was basically built to monitor devices, mobile device management, and firstly it was developed for managing Aruba as a managed service, because we had Central and some of this partner's customers were on AOS 8, AOS 10, and they wanted to be a managed service provider. So they built this. And really down here is the piece I asked them. Have you noticed the funny thing about this? Have you noticed the faces? UXI is one of our products. Yeah. So we stole all the HTML from UXI because it looks good. But if I go to view here, I can look at presence analytics. I can manage all my IoT sensors on the right side. But if I go to dashboards here, I can look at the utility consumption. So water, energy. I'll just show you that first. Here you go. So that is just pulling data from a CT clamp that I've got in London. We've got a flow sensor on the gas usage, which is the main pipe going to the boiler. And then we've got a flow detector on the tap. That's it. So all of a sudden, you can start to report on your utility usage over a period of time. And that's what you need. Here, in the IoT dashboard, if I go to my room, which is room 2, you can see all those things I showed you. So I've got vape detection, bottom right, for smoking. Doors are open and closed. All of these different things, I won't read them out. But what this is doing is I can set triggers. So you see where it's yellow and red? I can set a trigger to go through to a platform called Mobius Flow, which is a smart building platform. And that can tell Schneider to turn off power. It can tell Delta BMS to turn off the HVAC. Or it can simply just send an alert or a warning. So that is, I wanted to show you that because it's actually a real platform. It's just gone into a big events place in London, 2 universities in London as well. And it's just a nice way to present all that data. It's not as deep dive as, say, your one. That's a bit more focused for that customer. but this is a great one for just an education customer or a group of schools. The other thing I was going to show you is we've got a use case example here. If I show you here, this is just using that sensor map to actually show you what's going on in a building. So this is a dashboard by a platform called Thingit, and they're using these sensors to say if a room is occupied or not and whether you can book it. So there's an iPhone app, Android app that comes with it, and that will predict building optimization and space utilization. Here, oh no, I'm not going to show you that because we're on their Wi-Fi and I'm going to try and get into Central. So here is just a couple of examples of things that customers have bought off the shelf. So these are basically data layers you can buy. You can import that data and you can bring it into lots and lots of different ways. So this is just examples of Thingsboard is a platform you can buy off the shelf. So some of our customers have just bought this off the shelf. They've taken the data from the IoT sensors through Aruba, CT clamps on the top right, and then you've got HVAC switch off and on with temperature, and you've got some alarms. But that's a boxed package solution that talks directly to the sensors and talks directly to Aruba. So you can buy those off the shelf. But I think that is it. I think I've actually done it with giving you 10 minutes spare, which is good. But if there's any questions, I'm on the booth, 502, for the rest of the day. If you're interested in the networking side of sustainability insights, go to the GreenLake stand, because there's a guy on there that's got all the insights and dashboards that can report. If you want to see some more sensors and more demos around what we do with this, come and see me on the booth. But thanks for listening.